Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 14th round recap of the 2024 Candidates Tournament. Many of you left comments on last round's recap, round 13, saying it was the best recap and best chess video that some of you have ever seen. Well, today we are going to try to top that off. The Candidates Tournament crowns a champion, and that champion plays for the World Chess Championship either later on this year or in 2025. On the women's side, Tan Zhongyi of China leads by 1 point. A draw clinches first place. In the Open, Gukesh from India has 8.5. He's with the black pieces against Hikaru Nakamura, who has 8. Fabiano Caruana has white against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and they both have 8. If Gukesh wins, he wins the candidates. If Gukesh draws against Hikaru, the other game matters, and if Hikaru beats Gukesh, the other game matters. And I know the title is to crown a champion, but we very well could have tiebreaks tomorrow. We'll get into that later. Now, out of respect to all the candidates, I'm not skipping any games, even if they are not meaningful for the standings, because they all made it to this event. And despite your best efforts to get me not to cover games, I will cover everybody because I respect them and you should respect them too. Alireza Firouzja versus Vidit Gujarati finished their game in 3 minutes, which means they both were just very happy to go home. We start with a little, like you go to a fancy restaurant and they give you like a little free thing because the rest of the meal costs like $700. That's what this is. And before I continue to talk about games in this recap, for Firouzja, this is a forgettable event, and this is his second candidates, and we can only hope for higher expectations moving forward. Vidit finishes with 6 out of 14. He had a very up and down event. He was in the running for a little bit, but 2 unfortunate losses put him out of the running, but we'll be curious to hear his reflections as well. Goryachkina was in the running for a little bit. Nurgul Salimova, a very talented international master, the youngest player in the women's candidates, played a Philidor defense against the much more experienced Goryachkina. These two actually played the World Cup final. Go look up Women's World Cup of 2023. They had a blistering final, and here in the final round of the women's candidates, they put on a blistering game from the opening. Nurgul was in great shape, had a great position, but very quickly, Goryachkina, 2550 GM, multiple-time national champion, world chess champion challenger. She had a good position, but Nurgul defended very well. And ultimately, this game, as you can see, despite white being down a pawn, black is not going to be able to get out. It took a little while, but they ultimately made a draw on the 59th move. Now, Lagno versus Vaishali. Vaishali lost 4 games in a row and now won 4 games in a row. Lagno, Russian grandmaster. She is very, very strong, 25-40, but not her event. But in this game, she sacrificed the knight with massive pressure on Vaishali, and Vaishali walks her king to play defense. Some gangster behavior from her, and then launches a counterattack on Lagno. By the way, look at Lagno's time. She hasn't thought. She hasn't thought, okay? Probably because she has an early flight. And she sacrifices a piece, but black defends really, really well and emerges with counterattacking pressure and ultimately lands a very, very nice tactic. It looked like white was building up a nice advantage. Bishop f2, messing up the coordination of the white position. And rook g7, the counterattack comes straight down with knight f4. And Vaishali ends this tournament in one of the craziest streaks I've ever seen in my life. So white is completely stuck. She's going to lose material. d4, you can't move the knight. Vaishali loses 4 games in a row and then wins 5 games in a row. I don't think that's ever happened in any tournament at a high level ever. Like straight up. Like if any of you can find what... She ends the tournament with 7.5. You know who else has 7.5? Lei Tingjie. And she needs to beat Humpy to at least tie for first. And none of that even matters if Tan Zhongyi wins or draws her game. And in this game, Lei Tingjie put the knight on d6 and then sacrificed her queen. And then threatened rook b7. And got the rook there. And now the key idea here would have been bishop e3. And bishop e3 threatens bishop g5. And you cannot take because knight f7. But you also cannot take with the rook, because rook h8, you can't stop checkmate. So you play like knight f8, I take on f7, I'm going to win the queen, I'm going to win the rook. This is insanity. Unfortunately for Lei Tingjie, she doesn't see that. And she goes on to very quickly get a completely lost position. First it was equal, then it was unfortunately just lights out. And Humpy was very precise, very methodical, and it was very exciting for a moment. But Lei fought and fought and fought, and she ultimately goes down as Humpy wins the game with the 2 rooks. And the run has come to an end. And Tan Zhongyi made a draw. Tan Zhongyi played a Sicilian, and she actually played an offbeat Sicilian because she was still trying to win her game. And White actually, got not much out of the opening. Actually, Tan Zhongyi was quite a bit better, but she ultimately just completely killed the game off. She knew that a draw was getting her first place, and the players repeated, and Tan Zhongyi wins the women's candidates. And she's going to play Ju Wenjun for the World Chess Championship. Nijat versus Pragg. Out of respect to all the players, I will cover all of their games. This one was a King's Indian defense from Pragg. It was a knight bd7, e5 system, and this game was a long game. It got interesting when Abasov put his knight into the center of the board. Neither of these guys playing for first place, but Pragg playing for a 7 out of 14, 50% finish. And he had an advantage, knight versus bishop, for a little while, ultimately looking for a pawn break to infiltrate the white position. He lands that pawn break and applied consistent pressure throughout the middle game, ultimately getting a completely dominant advantage past the time control. He was methodical, he was slow, and he got a pawn up into a rook endgame. And here Abasov resigned because he's going to lose more pawns. And that was that. So a convincing win for Pragg. And that brings us to the 2 most important games of the day. And I do not understate when I say the 2 most important games of potentially the next decade of chess. Here are the situations. Jan Nepomniachtchi could win against Hikaru. Gukesh could draw. Excuse me. Did I say Hikaru? Against Fabiano. Gukesh could draw. Tomorrow they play a tiebreak. Nepo beats Gukesh. Nepo gets a rematch. Of all the possibilities, that is maybe the one people are like, we just saw that, right? Fabi can do the same thing as Nepo, play against Gukesh in a playoff. He could become the first American world champion since Bobby Fischer, and that would complete an incredible story. Hikaru going on that same path as Fabi would be nuts, and Gukesh, the youngest ever player to ever win the candidates, every story is incredible. All right, without further ado, here we go. D4. What? Hold on a minute. What happened to E4? E4 was the move Hikaru played the whole tournament. I guess he didn't like something, right? I guess he wasn't certain how he was going to play for a win against E4, E5. Maybe he didn't like the way Gukesh approaches the Italian. Maybe he didn't like the way Gukesh approaches bishop to B5. Not right now, but the Spanish. And Gukesh, rather than playing knight f6, e6, which, by the way, I'm not going to toggle much between these games, both must-win games, had d4 on the board. So that's interesting, right? Because someone needs to win in Fabi versus Nepo. So Gukesh, however, plays the Queen's Gambit accepted. When I booted up the game, this was already a shock to me. Not the Queen's Gambit accepted, but the fact that Hikaru played the Queen's Gambit. Because there are a lot of openings for black that can kill the fun. So I was very curious, what was the idea? Now, this position has been explored so much. And the line here goes c5, castles, a6, right? There's either the endgame line. This position has so many, white has so many possibilities on moves 7 and 6, and etc. And then Gukesh, in a position where a6, c5 has been played 99% of the time, plays bishop e7. What? He didn't play, and this move is deep because he got Hikaru to think for 2 minutes, and then for 12. for 12 minutes. That's crazy. On move 7? So what was the preparation? What did Hikaru have in store against the immediate c5 or against a6 c5? Something clearly must have gone wrong, and maybe Hikaru will explain. Maybe there will be this very obscure move, which in reality doesn't even make a whole lot of sense, because if you're going to play c5 on the next move, what if I take? Now you just lost you lost the tempo. So what is the big idea? Well, the big idea is that Gukesh then plays c5. What? And now the computer on a depth likes a move like e4, energetically playing for the center. A lot of positions I've reached here. But the players reach something like this, and now this queen e2 system trying to put the rook on d1 is played. Gukesh plays b5, takes on d4, and Hikaru even here could have maybe considered rook to d1, pinning the pawn to the queen, and then trying to take with the knight, or maybe even with the rook, right? But Hikaru has to win. No other result for him is satisfactory. So bishop to a2, Gukesh takes, Hikaru takes with a pawn. The idea is to create an isolated pawn, imbalanced pawn structure, right? And in an imbalanced pawn structure, white puts pieces around the pawn and then puts pieces like this and supports them. And, we'll play like bishop g5 or bishop f4, maybe rook d3, rook h3 and go for an attack. Gukesh calls the bluff on all of that and plays b4 and says, you know what, Hikaru? We're going to force something. I'm going to clear off the queen side. And the idea is that after pawn takes b4, you're not taking back with the bishop. What? Isn't that the whole point? No. The idea of b4 is that once Hikaru takes on b4, now black plays knight c6 and takes the pawn with the knight. And he has that luxury because after that, he blockades white's isolated pawn and he targets the bishop. And if white plays b5, oh, great. Good luck ever moving your pieces. b4 is a high-level idea. It was such a high-level idea. Magnus Carlsen himself, while doing commentary, praised this idea, said it was very clever from Gukesh. And so now, Hikaru goes knight e4. Gukesh still is able to trade the pawns. And now it's complete symmetry. Gukesh has to not lose. That's it. And then the winner of the other game plays him in a tiebreak. Bishop to b7. Hikaru plays knight back to c3. After spending 13 minutes, he did not like knight c5. Knight c5 could have led to a little bit of an imbalance, but nobody says that after knight c5 he has to be taken. Bishop d5. Gukesh is going to trade every mirror image piece. Hikaru's time is ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Knight back to c3. Gukesh plays knight d5. Again, looking to trade mirror image pieces. Once Hikaru starts running out of them, he's not going to be able to create winning chances. Tick-tock, tick-tock, bishop to d2 from Hikaru, keeping the tension. Gukesh, methodical, getting rid of Hikaru's pieces one by one. All right? Hikaru plays bishop to b1, creating a checkmating idea. Puts the bishop back on d2, but Gukesh is better. He's better because isolated pawn is going to get blockaded. And now Hikaru decides to go bishop d3. And bishop d3 is one of his early admissions that something has gone wrong and something needs to give. Now, what I mean by that is that Gukesh will take on f3 and take on d4. Hikaru cannot take this pawn on a6 because he would lose a bishop and then a second bishop. And now, Hikaru is just a pawn down. What does he have? Imbalance. He has the two bishops, so therefore in some endgames he will put a little bit of pressure on Gukesh. And he begins putting a little bit of that pressure, right? Let's not forget. All right, queen b5, take, take. If Gukesh gets to this endgame, he might be in trouble, but Gukesh is not going to lose his pawn. He's just a pawn up. Rook c1, king f1. Now Gukesh just needs to trade the pieces. But here's the crazy part. The crazy part is that Hikaru knows he won't win. But he doesn't know if one of them will win. One of those guys. If Hikaru wants to play for a win because a draw gets him nothing, he could lose. Hikaru is like Thanos. If he snaps, Gukesh wins the candidates. Maybe he doesn't like Nepo, maybe he doesn't like Fabiano, but like this is the reality. But in a position like this, doing that would be pretty unsportsmanlike. Doing that would be kind of insane. Even though a draw does not win him the tournament, Hikaru has to play, and he has to keep the game going, but he's not gonna, like, sack all his pieces, because then he's gonna lose. And he's down a pawn, and my friends, Gukesh goes to the opposite colored bishops. Hikaru gets the pawn, but there is absolutely nothing here. And I am fast forwarding. A flank pawn versus a central pawn is created. Even rook and bishop versus rook is a draw. You could lose all your pawns and your bishop. But none of that happens. Hikaru fights until the bitter end. And this game, in the 60th move, clears out. Both guys go on a pawn race. Rook f8, a8 queen. Gukesh holds his hands together like this. Like this, holding on for dear life. You cannot get rid of that. Hikaru gives up the rook for it. And Gukesh has drawn against Hikaru. And all this means right now is Hikaru can no longer win the candidates. And as much as he gave interviews beforehand that content creation for him is bigger, it's the profession, there's a lot less pressure on him. For a second candidates in a row, as a person who was cheering for Hikaru, I'm heartbroken. And I have nothing but respect for Gukesh and all of his fans. I can't say that every single person in India, let's say they say Gukesh has billions, over 1 billion fans in India, probably 2 billion worldwide. Gukesh knocks Hikaru out of contention to win the candidates. And all eyes are on this. What a performance from Gukesh. 9 out of 13. And who would have thought that game against Firouzja that he lost, even a draw would have won him the candidates, let alone a win. He almost won the candidates with 10 points. How is that even possible? But the winner of this game catches Gukesh. Knight c3. Fabiano Caruana invites a Nimso Indian. But we have d5. We have an exchange, queen's gambit decline, bishop g5, bishop b4, and Jan gets aggressive, kicking out Fabiano's bishop. Bishop goes back to g3. Knight comes into e4, applying some pressure. We could be looking at the final game of the 2024 candidates. If this game ends in a draw, Gukesh wins. If one of these players wins this game, tomorrow they play against Gukesh in a rapid tiebreaker. Which, by the way, breaking a tie in the candidates without the two people playing each other seems crazy. So we make them play each other. I just find, like, I don't know how we break ties in chess. 15-minute games is wild to me. Queen c2, h5, going for h4, f3, kicking the knight out of the center. Now your bishop can't get trapped. And Nepo plays bishop e6. And Fabi thinks for a little while. Bishop e6 is a move that has been played, but it is very rare. As you can see, very, very imbalanced position. Black with the bishop pair. Black with overextended pawns. White with a strong cluster. Opportunity to play f4, e4. This is what you play when you need to win. This is what you play when you need to lose. It's one of the rarest cases in chess where somebody must win this game. If these guys draw, think about the result of this game when it's unknown. Hikaru winning and a draw on the other board doesn't matter. Draw on this game doesn't matter. Gukesh winning doesn't matter. So somebody has to win this game. Bishop d3, c6, long castle, knight d7, f4, Fabiano aggressive but down 20 minutes early. Clearly surprised in the opening by Jan, who immediately makes a mistake. Apparently the best move here for black was just to take this pawn, but that seems kind of insane, and then go here. He didn't like something about that. Instead, he goes bishop to g4. Knight f3, queen e7 attacking this pawn, but Fabi shreds open the center. This is on fire. That's on fire. Somebody is coming to the e-file to target the queen on e7. Now, Jan has to start getting rid of Fabiano's pieces, which control the center. The best move there might have been once again to take, and once again to take on f4. But instead of that, he plays bishop c3, queen c3, gets rid of the other knight. Both bishops are gone for the knights. Chops down the center once again. Chops down the center once again. That's 4 captures in a row for Jan Nepomniachtchi. And a very nice move here from Fabiano. g4. It's going to be bishop. It's going to be knight. Black's king is still stranded in the center of the board, so it's going to be under fire. And I'm looking to create an outside pass pawn. So in this position, Nepomniachtchi plays long castle, but it would have been better for him to first play h4. Because then Fabiano would play king b1, and then long castle, d5, knight e5 guards the pawn. But what happens in the game is that he long castles, and Fabiano attacks him right away. Now Jan plays h4, gambiting the pawn on c6 completely. What is he doing? It's completely spinning out of control for Jan. He's completely losing. I mean, if bc6, queen c6 is literally mate. So Jan, facing this absolute destruction of his king's castles, play knight c5. Fabiano plays bishop f5 check, forcing the king to b8. King to b1 on the board. The only thing Fabi has to be careful about is this pawn. This pawn is gonna get there at some point in the end. Jan's best line here is to play rook d1 and start trading and defending an endgame. But he knows that if he does that, he can't win the candidates. So what does he do? Keeps pawns on the board. Absolute psycho. This pawn is 2 squares away from queening. And in this position, Fabiano Caruana can disconnect the black pieces like this, and then play rook e1, probably play b4, kick the pieces out, play queen e5 and get c7 on the board. Knight d7, there is c7. Fabi does that, but in a more flashy way. Rook to d7. What a move. You cannot take with the knight because c7 check, I win the rook. Oh my god. But Fabiano must be completely winning. Rook takes d7, c takes d7. You cannot take the knight, the pawn with the knight, because I play queen takes rook. Rook d8, queen d4, knight d7, rook d1. The game is over. It is absolutely over. You can't move. You can't move the knight, you can't move the queen, you can't move the rook. You're going to lose everything. Well, as it turns out, you can. Queen c5. What? Well, if bishop d7 takes, oh my god. You cannot both defend the pawn and the bishop, and a draw is no good. So Fabiano plays the best move. He takes on f4 with check. The queen goes back. The queen goes back. Now Jan's pawn is 2 squares away from queening. But white is still completely winning. White is still completely winning. He plays bishop e4, setting up queen d5 and a nasty infiltration to the corner of the board, which is why Jan kicks out a window. And he is now officially down by 4 on the Stockfish evaluation. If we count the material, it's equal. It's +4, +5, but it's equal. Fabio plays queen d5 because it's a fork of checkmate, but it's also a fork of f7. Fabiano Caruana is completely winning. But he doesn't know that, and neither do you, right? Because there's no eval bar. So, white is applying a lot of pressure, but white has 7 minutes and 40 seconds to make 7 moves, or he loses the game, and there's a pawn a square away from queening on the edge of the board. Fabiano now plays queen h7 with pressure on the knight. King b8, unpinning and enabling the movement of the knight. Now Fabio plays a cold-blooded move, a3, but he burned almost half his time on that. Now the king has no problems on the back rank. Queen e5 played by Jan. Fabiano has 5 moves, 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Queen h6, an excellent move. Trying to go here and play queen b7 mate. Jan comes back to c7. Now Fabiano has 2 minutes. 2 minutes for 4 moves. If Fabi plays rook h1 in this position, black plays knight c5. Let's say you play queen h2. Rook d1. You cannot take because you lose your king. Queen a2. King a2. There's no queen f7 because you're pinned. So then there would be queen h2, rook h2, knight e4, fe4, rook g1. You got to win this rook endgame. Put the rook on e2 and try to win this endgame, or maybe rook h4. Oh my gosh. Fabi finds g5, which is the best move. Let's just go. Rook g8. Now look at this move. Rook h1. He stopped everything because the rook can come down, but Fabi has 54 seconds for 2 moves. Knight c5. And in this position, if Fabi retreats to c2, if Fabi goes to f5, he's in good shape. But he decides right now is where I'm going to make my stand. Bishop to h7. And black is busted. Black is busted because where do you move? If you play rook c8, I trade, we trade queens. This is easy. But what Fabiano had missed is rook takes g5. Sacrificing the rook and winning the bishop with a check. But what's very important is that now Fabiano has half an hour and still a winning position. So it was dangerous. This pawn is scary, but he's going to win it and advance this pawn. Fabiano sits back. He has 30 minutes. He takes a sip of water. And he throws it all away. King to A1 was the wrong move. And it was the wrong move because you had to go King A2, induce the check, then go to A1, and then in this position, King B1, and the queen does not protect the pawn anymore. That is what he had to go for. That's very tough to see. Queen F3, there's a lot of drawing potential. Queen E5 check is the key idea before you lose your rook. And then in this position, you take with the queen, you bring your rook, you bring your queen, not there, but just in general, and then you win. This is not a perpetual because of King A2, Queen C4, etc. Bobby has thrown it away. Queen C2. And the position is back to equal. Queen G8. Why is it back to equal? Because of this move, protecting this pawn. The white queen has to protect B3 and has to attack the pawn right away. And in case that's not obvious to you, that is not possible. You cannot do that. King A2, pawn to A4, that's it. That is the nail in the coffin. Fabiano Caruana has blown the game, but he's going to keep going. F4. The idea of F4 is relatively straightforward. Black has to make a move. You can't trade the queen, and this move looks nice, but it doesn't do anything. And this is the move that Jan played. Advantage. Fabiano. The winning move, the drawing move, was King A6 for some reason. Just basically saying, don't touch anything. Don't put the knight on B3. Don't block the diagonal to the king. Now it's white's turn to make a move. You give a check, King B5. The king is safe. There's much deeper lines here, but knight B3 allows this and allows this. Oh my God, Fabiano Caruana is winning again. Queen to C3. And the point is that even though your rook is about to get removed from the corner, this is a check. And the rook escapes. And you cannot queen because this is checkmate incoming. Black is up has two queens and queen A1 is mate. Rook to E1 and suddenly Jan is back to square one. Queen F1. Fabiano Caruana protects against the promotion. And the pawn is just going to go. Queen D5 check. King to B1. This time he doesn't make the wrong move. Queen F5 check. The king goes to the corner. The queen returns, just trying to be close. Knight to B3. Fabiano advances 3 squares away from queening and enough time on the clock not to screw it up. May I remind you, when he had no time back on move 38, he had no bonus time. But now that he plays F5, he is completely winning. Oh my goodness, Jan Nepomniachtchi is not going to be able to sleep tonight. Knight to D3, a valiant attempt. That's checkmate. Rook to B1. Valiant attempt, that's defense. Knight C5, but guess what? Fabiano doesn't have to repeat moves. Tick tock. Now white's pawn is 2 squares away from queening. And guess what? Black's pawn is not. It's not. Knight to B3 check. Knight to D2. Did Fabiano blunder a fork? No. Queen H1 check escaping. The king goes to A7. Fabiano plays Rook C1. And Jan gives a check and plays Queen E6. What? Rook C7? Knight B3 is a problem. This pawn is hanging, but you can't take it. You can't take this pawn because Knight B3. Okay, well, that's easy. You just play Rook C7. And that's exactly what Fabiano does and loses his entire advantage. What? It's the most natural move. Well, apparently, the winning move was Rook D1. And then walking the king back out into the open and allowing this check, and then you go back. And the point is, black has to constantly come back to this, but there is no threat. There is no threat. Knight to D2, King A1. There is no threat. And the best that black can do is return to this position. And every time you return, Queen C7, every time you return, it's white to move. So you're stuck in this carousel, this never-ending merry-go-round, but you're a move short. So Fabi had to go Rook D1 or Rook E1. He goes here, and now it no longer works. He cannot take because Queen E1 is mate. You could lose. So he plays F7, And now knight b3, king b1, and ya Nepomniachtchi. There is a draw in this position. Somehow the angel of death just watches over. It doesn't allow Nepo to lose. You play knight to d2, you play king to c2, and you let your knight die. And in this position, down a rook, down a promotion, and down potentially mate, it is a draw. You cannot walk your king to the c file because I take your rook with check. The rook can't be taken otherwise because of f8. But it's a draw. King b1, knight d2 is just a draw. But ya Nepomniachtchi doesn't find it, and Fabiano Caruana is winning again. King a2, knight back to c5, and Fabiano has check here, check. If the king runs forward, you lose, so you have to go back. From there and there, I give this check on e2, and then I win the pawn. I'm winning the pawn on h2. And you can't take my pawn because it's protected. The only thing you have is queen d5 or here. Queen d5. But wait a minute. Wait a minute, how does that work? Wait a minute, how does that work? How is that going to work? Queen a8, king b5, queen e8, here, queen e2. Oh, it's going to work like this. Black can't go here because it's mate. So black has to block. And then there is no access to d1. That is how he wins. Fabiano Caruana is winning queen a8, queen a8, queen e2, queen h2. He wins the pawn. Fabiano plays queen a8. And he repeats moves once. He repeats moves one time. He does this, so now he gains time. Now he gains 30 seconds. King to b5, queen e8, queen e2. And he goes here. And now if Fabiano gives this check, that is the third time that position happened. And it's a draw, so he can't. So he goes here, and it's back to equal after queen f1. My heart can't take this. Queen c4 is a threat of a perpetual. h1 queen is a threat. Queen here, here. Check, here, check, here, check. King goes back. You can't give this check. You can't play rook e1 because of queen c4. What do? You also can't make a queen because you lose. So Fabiano does what he can, gives up the rook, takes a pawn with check, takes the knight with check. And in this position, he gives a million checks, and into this endgame up a pawn. After one of the most unbelievable games of the calendar year and maybe of the decade, Fabiano Caruana is in a queen in 2 versus queen in 1 endgame. This is winnable when the pawns are up the board, but we very quickly find ourselves in a situation where white can't make progress because they're just simply going to be weakening their king, and there is nothing that you can do. And the players shuffled. We have now officially made the 100th move. Ladies and gentlemen, this game, agreed drawn on move 109, which means Damaraju Gukesh of India is the youngest ever player to win the candidates tournament at the age of 17 with 9 out of 13 triumphing over Hikaru, ya Nepomniachtchi, and Fabiano Caruana, tied for second with 8.5. This is a sensation. He qualifies to play Ding Liren in a World Chess Championship match either later in 2024 or early 2025. Tan Zhongyi will be the challenger, a new challenger to Zhu Wenjun. That title will stay in China no matter what. But Gukesh has a chance to win the World Chess Championship for India, something that we know has happened in the past multiple times at the hands of the legend Vishwanathan Anand. What a candidates this has been. Shock, heartbreak for fans of Caruana, Nepo, and Hikaru, but there is absolutely nothing you can do but commend the efforts of the young man from India. I have nothing else to say. While I have you, if you're still here, I shouted this out yesterday. You can pre-order this beautiful chess deck. It's got openings, puzzles on it. Very nice present, all right? I just need to decompress. Thank you all so much. Please write your comments if you listen to this part of the video. I've made the last few recaps under the weather. My throat is killing me. I probably have a cold. Thank you so much for tuning in every single round. We averaged 600,000 views on these recaps. That is so many people. There was 130,000 live viewers on YouTube today. What a tournament. What an incredible event. And I will announce one final thing. Crazy major announcement coming soon to end this after this tournament is over. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Congratulations once again to Gukesh. Congratulations to Tan Zhongyi and to all the players. What a candidates. World Chess Championship is next. Get out of here.